Oiga, venga por sus arepas mañana y de paso lleva un encargo. No sé. No sé, yo no le he
I
hecho.
was like pretty
No,
to play with like the
mira.
hot chocolate that they would give me, and I like trying to do like
No, ¿dónde parquear mañana? Creo que
kiwi fruiting,
fruiting.
but with the cheap coffee.
Y ya dijeron, no, tú entras acá, te damos el acceso y ya.
Of course. Of course.
No importa.
I do that. It's like has to be like a costeño, so it like makes the coffee kind of salty. Or the, sorry, chocolate kind of salty.
Delicia amarilla.
Vaya, this right, I'm eating it.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking
Bueno,
about
yo creo que para ir porque yo fui a dos y nada me tocó al último. Bueno,
Don't listen to those.
pero ya sé dónde es. Es que yo feliz me estoy buscando dónde parquear. Don Bichami, tiene otro poquito. ¿Te la preparo? ¿Te preparo tu arepa?
Yo voy para allá. O sea, cuando termine de presentar.
Ok. Es que no quiero poner más arepas porque si no se seca. Se empiezan a
Entonces sí.
Entonces sí, por favor.
Porque hay las
Porque estoy
arepas-
emocionada, o sea, nunca he tenido como una arepa, o sea, de que desde que la. O sea, desde el maíz, ¿me entiendes?
Lo único que me hace falta es pues, sembrar el maíz, pero hasta ya no me da el patio.
Más.
¿La quieres con todo?
Sí, por favor. Menos champiñones.
Sí, con todo.
Muy. Esto yo le llamo una arepa bar.
de la tierra.
Arepa bar. Como siempre hay es un taco bar. No, es una arepa bar. Porque en vez de
I
taco.
have like always jewelry. That's just my personal. I'm chill. And I'm definitely getting sleep, so I need coffee.
Un minuto.
¿En un minuto?
Sí.
Ya vamos a empezar, ok.
Entonces aquí tengo una aretita, aquí tengo el ají, el ajicito de chile, el ajicito chévere. Y con las que quieras que traigan.
Vamos a hacer así bien íntimo. Ya que estamos aquí.
Oh, colombiana. Wow.
Pues, o sea, solamente tenemos los productos de la mayor calidad.
¿Dónde la consiguen la colombiana? Aquí se
Yo
consigue.
la
Ah, tú
conseguí.
la traes.
Yo creo que en Miami no, o sea, no sé qué tan difícil sería conseguir eso como en...
No es fácil.
Me imagino, o sea, sí, porque en Las Palmas no lo venden, ese es el único lugar.
Por eso decía Don Bichai. Con todo el compro. Y para ti te
Ya.
van con todo.
No, aquí atrás.
Bien por ahora. I know it needs batteries. It's okay. I'm gonna get batteries. Okay, I got you. Thank you, Angie.
¡Qué emoción! Okay,
No
I'm gonna...
color,
Oh, it needs batteries, but I'll get some later.
Okay, you want to start right now to talk a little bit about like what this event is all about. So, buenas tardes, hola. Welcome to the hybrid event that we're making to commemorate 100 years of Colombian comics. Today, we gather to celebrate the rich and vibrant history of comics in Colombia and honor the talented artists and creators who have brought their stories to life over the past century. We would like to thank our generous sponsors who have been able to kind of come to this event. No one here, well, the sponsors is here for us to call up, but in memory they're here, including Center for Arts and Society, Studio for Creative Inquiry, Colombianos en Carnegie Mellon, Colombians in Pittsburgh, and a few other more people, including the Ashford Kenner Room that we're in here today, that's allowing us to host this event. So, I'm Angelica Bonilla. This is Dr. Felipe Gomez, and we kind of have been organizing this event for the past year because we wanted to make something out of like Colombian comics. We're both incredibly passionate about comic books, especially trying to make awareness on like the beautiful history and rich work that has come from Colombia. So I'm gonna let Felipe here talk a little bit about sort of like what we have here in this kind of like private slash-ish collection and archive here, as well as like what you guys maybe saw outside of like different materials that we showed up there that might not be in the physical books that we have here. And on the corners of all of the tables, there's like little program books that describe a little bit more about what we're gonna have the coming days. So this is the only event that we're having here, which is the opening remarks, but tomorrow we're gonna have a series of conversatorios / roundtables and panels from different Colombian comic book artists, historians, and writers. We're gonna have a bilingual panel, an English language panel, and a Spanish language panel. Right here, we have some wonderful panelists here. Catalina, who's gonna be here with us in the English panel tomorrow at 2 p.m., so be sure to come here to support us. And with that, don't forget to grab one of these, and Felipe here will talk a little more about like what we have in the space.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying the Arepas. Shout out to Jenny and Arepas. And so as Angie was mentioning, this is an event that we created to celebrate the 100 years of Colombian comics. And I guess there's so many questions that we can start asking from there, right? So when we talk about 100 years, of course, we're also dealing with one of the symbols of Colombian culture, which is 100 years of solitude. And whenever we're talking about a centennial, we have to try to inscribe and de-inscribe the events in relation to Gabriel Garcia Marquez and the relationship between literature and comics is also one that's full of tension, right? So we rather recently were able to start researching and using comics at the university level as something that was legitimate and well, still very questioned by some sectors. But there was and continues to be this tension with literature, which is something that we're always like having to deal with, having to talk about, having to justify why it is of value to research about comics or to make comics. And the other question, or another question, because there are so many that we can start asking, is like 100 years counting from where, right? From whom? And that's, of course, the question that we have to deal with. Last year, I think it was that they had Centennial comic celebrations in Mexico, and which is also an odd thing to think about when we think that there are some scholars who have actually drawn, sorry about the pun, to the Maya glyphs as one of the grandparents of comics, right? So when are we counting and what are we counting? But if we're starting to think about comics that were published in newspapers like that have the form that we see today, and some researchers, including Pablo Guerra, who will be speaking tomorrow, have pointed to the year 1924 when the comic Mojicon was first published. And let's see if I can find a way to get access to my screen here so I can put it ahead. Maybe not. I don't know where it went. Can you do this? Yes, okay. And we have some examples of a Mojicon that was published in 1924 in Mundo al Día. So some people have pointed to this as the first Colombian comic, even though it's actually a copy from a comic that was published in the U.S. newspaper, or actually not copy, but which was a common practice where syndicated comics would be sent to different newspapers who bought them, right? And then the speech bubbles would be translated, right? But of course, as you all probably know, things don't fit the same in a speech bubble where you don't have a lot of space, and Colombia, or Spanish in general, uses more words than English, right? So things would not necessarily fit in the speech bubble. So Adolfo Samper, who actually was the person making these comics, started taking poetic license, right, in terms of what he wrote in there. And then at some point started also modifying the drawings and introducing some kind of colloquialisms. So in a sense, appropriating that foreign comic, and this is the reason why Mohicon is actually a word that's used for sweet bread, right? And this is the reason, or one of the reasons why it's pointed as one of the first Colombian comic. Another question that we can ponder about is, well, there's Adolfo Samper, who's the visible head there, the visible hand doing this work, but who is the invisible, who are the invisible people who are helping? Because we know that comics publishing, and especially in newspapers, is not just a one-person job, right? There's usually a lot more people who are involved. So who are we not hearing about? And that's one of the questions that we wanted to also keep in mind. Usually canonically, so in 1924 we have Mohicon, and then probably from the 1950s, 60s, Copetín is also one of the most well-known comics. It was published in a major newspaper, El Tiempo, for a long time, and this is, I guess, one reason why many people knows about it, and many people know about it, and it's been canonized in a way. And then there's a period in the 70s and 80s where there's a lot of other attempts at creating comics in newspapers, and even in Sunday supplements. They usually directed towards children, and that's also an interesting thing, right? Like how throughout the years the audience has changed, and comics have been taken to be for kids and not just for kids, and etc. And during this period also, something that affected comics was the fact that the publishing industry had an additional tax for comics. And so comics were actually put in the same category as pornography and horoscopes, and they were taxed additionally. So most of the smaller printing presses could not afford to be able to break even, right, by publishing comics, so they decided not to do it. So it's interesting to see that only in the 21st century, when this law, La Ley del Libro, actually changes, and comics are taken out of that category, there's an opportunity for the kinds of printing that we see on the tables here in person. One of the decisions that we made with Angie when we were planning this event, and it's been a long time in the planning, was to focus on more contemporary comics. So we're not trying to be exhaustive. We're not trying to find the history of comics, but just to trace back a little bit, and then also take a look at what has been going on since the 1990s and the 2000s. The 2000s are especially important, I think, in the history of comics in general, and in terms of Latin American comics, because the advent of the internet gave many people the opportunity to self-publish, right, and to get to reach audiences that they could not reach before through newspapers or through printed books. And so we see an explosion of comics that happens after the 2000s, and of course I think most significantly for Colombian and Ecuadorian comics, Pau and Paola, actually through an Argentine blog, starts publishing her work, which then becomes hugely influential. It's printed on paper and then reprinted and then translated and etc. It opens up also the way for many of the younger comics makers and many of the women comics makers. As we had it until here, most of the names that would represent Philippine comics would be like Ernesto Franco and the example that we saw before with Mocicon, male authors, right? I'm going to start talking a little bit also about these images that you can see in the immersive room over there. It's being projected in there if you want to take a look later, and they're also printed out there on the wall if you want to take a look from outside. An important moment, I think, for a certain genre that's being represented here is in the 1970s. We have sociologist Orlando Falsborda. Orlando Falsborda was actually the founder of the Facultad de Sociología, the College of Sociology at Universidad Nacional. And he pairs up with an artist called Chalarca, and also with a group of campesinos, of peasants in the North Atlantic region, in Sucre more specifically. And they start working together to create some comics that would represent land struggles throughout the centuries. And these were later collected by the Fundación del CINU in a volume that's called Historia Gráfica de la Lucha por la Tierra. And I think these were hugely influential for many of the works that came in the last decade. And for instance, the work that Joan Rappaport has done as an anthropologist to recover these comics has been very important. And we see that some of the presenters that we'll have tomorrow morning working from Medellin in Altair's Comics have been working with her in order to represent that research that she's been doing and recovering not just Falsborda and his ideas, but also the comics themselves. Altair's Comics, so I talked about, we'll have them tomorrow, talking about their work. And I'll just mention also how important and influential I think the work from Lina Flores on the right in the picture, and Estefania now in the middle, Pablo Perez is there on the left, has been in terms of recovering the place of female comics artists in Colombia, right? This still is a very male-centric history and very male-centric representation. We can also talk about the intersections of race and class that go there. But the work of Estefania and Lina and also Pablo has been pioneering in this direction, right? Trying to find those women who were making comics, publishing, but also working within the comics industry, and not necessarily as artists, but as part of it too. And also about the women reading in comics in Colombian history. Some of their work you can see in the immersive room and outside too. Comics created by Estefania and Lina, who are not just journalists and researchers, but also comics artists. And some of these you can see on the tables too, and you can take a good look in them, through them. This is Pablo Perez and Lina Flores. You'll also see work by Pablo Guerra. Pablo Guerra has probably been, I would say, one of the most important script writers in Colombian comics in the last 25 years. I think probably one of the most important moments for his career started when he was publishing in El Espectador, another main newspaper. It was actually the online supplement, the comic Los Perdidos that he wrote the scripts for, and Federico Neira made the art for. And then you'll find some examples of Los Perdidos there, but there's also other examples of the covers of some of the books. Los Aldos, very important internationally because it won a very prestigious manga award in Tokyo. And some of the work on the right, well, both Recetarios Aurelios Lejanos and La Palizua, and there's other titles that he has been doing with other artists to work with issues of social justice, right? And in terms of the Comisión de la Verdad, in terms of the peace accords with the FARC guerrillas, and trying to give victims of violence a voice, right? And this is very linked with Francisco Borda's work, because I think many of those ideas carry on in terms of working with the community to be able to help tell their stories, right? But the communities themselves using those comics as an opportunity to make their stories known and also to remember their struggles throughout the century. And this is an example from one of those comics, and you'll find some physical copies that you can flip through. And then we also have Cindy Elefante, who's also going to be speaking tomorrow. And I think Cindy Elefante is very important for us in terms of the representation of diversity. And she will be actually talking about her character of Power Plumas, who's a queer character and having to deal with everyday situations in Colombian society, in Colombian schools, educational settings, etc. And so I invite you to listen to her talk about her comic, Power Plumas. And we're very, very fortunate to have Angie Bonilla here, some of her work. I think Angie's not just a very interested student, and I'm going to have to stop here to this account to talk about how we got to know each other. And so I started working on the Digital Humanities Project, an archive of Latin American comics, and called the Latin American Comics Archive. And then 5 years ago, Angie came up to me and said, I want to work with you, I want to work with this project, I want to learn about Colombian comics. And I think it was Angie wanting to know more about her Colombian heritage, but at the same time very interested in her artistic pursuits, which has taken her, I think, in a very true Carnegie Mellon way, to find interesting combinations. And she has worked with generating fabric through computers, but also, and I think this is a project that I'll talk to Angie about how I think it's very connected to the work that Lori Craner does here at CMU, but also creating comics herself and with the assistance of artificial intelligence, right? And Angie will be talking to us about it tomorrow. And so you're all very invited tomorrow to come hear her talk about her work. And we'll also have with her Camilo Aguirre. Camilo Aguirre, well, it's an artist who's published quite a lot, but in particular he'll be talking about some work that he did here in the United States. And I think in this panel we'll find that in common we're talking about what it means to have a Colombian experience in the United States, right? Or what is a Colombian experience in the United States in comics? And I think Camilo will add to that conversation. You'll find some examples. His works, he'll be talking in particular about what remains in his comic in English that's also available around here and on one of the tables. And some more images from his work. And then we also are very fortunate that we have here Catalina Cheng, who will be joining us also in that panel. I think I have to credit students here who were at the forefront of asking Catalina to come be part of this. Catalina, I think, is very interesting, not just because she does pottery and ceramics with the influence of comics, and gives it, I think, a very interesting spin to what is a comic, but also because our Colombian, Chinese, American heritage combines in this regard. So Catalina is also going to be here talking to us tomorrow about her work, and you can also see some of it on the table on display right now. And we might have an auction for it. I don't know. And of course, larger names that we are very glad that I contributed in some way. And we would have loved, of course, to have Paola be with us, join us. She's very busy, but she was very generous to agree to give us some of her work so that we could display it. Most famously, I think Iris Tropical, that I mentioned before, was a real landmark in the history of Colombian comics in the early 2000s. It's been published so many times and in different languages already. And I think there's a real struggle in defining her as Colombian or as Ecuadorian or as a Colombian Ecuadorian or as an Argentine because she lives in Argentina or has lived in Argentina for a long time.
She has lived in the US too.
So in different parts. So you'll find some examples of her work here. Her most recent one, Todas las bicicletas que tuve, is also around. And then this is an interesting point, I think, also to think about is one of the things that's happened between the moment when the archive started and I'm going to say probably 7-8 years ago, and now is that the YouTube movement, for instance, happened, right? So there has been some reverberations of that in art, of course in comics too, and in Colombian comics as well. And one of the first works that we got from the archive was by Trucha Frita, and Alberto Trucha Frita is an artist in Medellin, and he has since been accused of harassment or something like that. I don't know all the details about it, but it brings one of the important questions for us, which is, what do we do with this work, right? What do we do with the work of people who are being canceled or accused? Do we still include it? Do we talk about it? Do we address it? Or do we leave it out? Right? So I think that's at least one of the questions that we want to start looking at, and especially since we see our event as an opportunity to start thinking about these topics before 2024, get these conversations started, right? So that when the bigger events that Biblioteca Nacional and others are planning for next year, we have started to take a position on these topics and address them, because they haven't been addressed. And there's other examples that we can talk about in that regard. Some other, I was mentioning Paola, Todas las bicicletas que tuve. She's her most recent comic, and she also gave us some other art with bicycles, which I think is lovely. And Johnny V, same thing, right? So what do we do with people who have been accused, addressed, or señalados in some regard? What do we do with their work? And then we have people from Colectivo Leche. Colectivo Leche is a group, a large group of comics artists based in Cali, and they were super important and relevant throughout the years 2019 and 2020 when all the marches happened, because they were channeling many of these images and appeals to the public due to the situation on the ground in Cali. We have some other work that that they shared with us, and also other more general work that has to do with that moment in 2019, 2020, of course, the start of the COVID pandemic, but also a moment when the marches were a moment paused and then started again. And we have Matador here, who has been like very popular, very influential for a long time because of his opportunity of publishing in major newspapers like El Tiempo, but also another one that has been accused as part of this Colombian not Me Too movement, I suppose, in terms of, I think, allegations of abuse with his staff. And some other comics that came from that moment, which was very difficult in the year 2020, also year 2021, with the repression that came with the movements and the marches. So you'll find several examples of that kind of work. Some of it, like on the right, the work by Cindy Infante that I mentioned before, so as well. And of course, this one that you've seen in the poster, Jason Malagon very generously donated this to us for the poster. And then I mentioned before some of the work that Pablo Guerra has done for after the peace accords with the FARC guerrilla. Some of the Comisión de la Verdad publications are also in the form of comics. Some of them have had the assistance of Pablo Guerra, but other people have also been involved in telling these stories about victims and what has happened, I guess, with people in the Pacific Atlantic coast and Pacific and Atlantic coast, but also in the rural central areas throughout these years, receiving violence from the state, from the guerrilla, from the paramilitary. And in terms of representation, another conversation that we also are having here is in terms of representation of indigenous voices and Afro-Colombian voices. We have such a large way to go, right? There's so little, and what there is so terrible. So that's actually one of the things that Angie and I were trying to actively work on, and I think we still have a long ways to go because it's been very difficult. But we were very, very happy to be able to contact Michael Quetillo, who's a Colombian indigenous artist, and he donated some of his work or contributed some of his work also to the event, and you'll be able to see some examples of his work there. And there's also some Afro-Colombian comics that you'll find. Again, we still need to do much better in that regard, but we're trying. We're heading in that direction, and we will be able to. In terms of gender representation, I think that's the largest movement that we'll find. A lot of female artists, but also a lot of queer, non-male, non-binary artists that have started to come out and produce magnificent work. Among them, Paula Carvajal, and Ana Maria Lopez, for instance, in terms of work that has to do with trauma or with mental health, I would say. And I think it's also someone to look forward to. And then we also wanted to inhabit a little bit of the zine space. I think the jury's still out on how to pronounce zine or zine. But there's so much interesting work that's been done. And La Maleta Francinera, for instance, in Bogotá, just opened a space, and they actually sent us a bunch of photos of their space in Chapinero, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's in Teusaquillo, in Bogotá, where there's a large archive, a large collection of zines that have been produced since the 1970s and 80s and into the present. So check that out. And with that, I just wanted to give another shout out to our sponsors in the Modern Languages Department. Our department has been tremendously supportive of this effort from the beginning. The Center for the Arts and Society, and the Directors Fund of the Frank Kratky Studio for Creative Inquiry, and the Dietrich College Associate Dean for DEI, the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion, the Global Studies Program, Columbia and Pittsburgh, and did I mention the, no, you mentioned the students, the Columbia and CMU students, and also individual donors who have made this possible. Thank you so much to Jenny and Arepas for bringing arepas for us, also Colombino for bringing hot chocolate and Colombian coffee, how could we not? But also many thanks to Kathy Kenner, who has made this room possible, and then to Stefan Hasper, who manages this room and generously helped us in every way possible so that we could hold the event today and tomorrow here in this space. A shout out to Olivia in the back who's been helping us with everything also in terms of the room. And last but not least, I want to thank Lauren, who showed up since yesterday to help us out, setting up the room and has been doing a lot. And then to Santi, who's been working with us for the past week, also getting things ready, and who's doing the documentation today with the camera work. And I couldn't thank more Angie Bonita, who's a senior in our PXA program. Is that correct?
BCSA.
BCSA, computer science and arts major, who is graduating this year. So we're so lucky that we were able to hold this event this semester before she leaves to work at Google. And so yes, we're so fortunate, but I can't tell you how many meetings we have with Angie and how much work she has been doing to put everything together, from the webpage that you can, I invite you to browse through if you haven't, because it has a lot of information about the presenters, their bios, their abstracts, their work, and just everything, curating, thinking about how we would do it, what we would do, pulling together people, resources, finding sponsors, etc. So I think we should give Angie a huge applause. And
Also, very important.
And with that said, we just have about 20 minutes before we have to leave the room, but there's food, there's coffee, there's chocolate, and there's comics. So feel free to browse, move around. You can go into the interactive room, take a look at the screens there, and also look at it from outside if you want. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope you can come tomorrow.
No.